1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Napile se ulice, jer na tebe misli curice.
I arrived to Estonia on the 4th of October with a couple of friends. We arrived in Tallinn, and straight up it was cold as shit. You get out of the airport, which may I add is very modern and very nice, and one of the nicest ones I've ever seen, and boom, you're hit with a gust of cold wind. Coming from Berlin, where the temperature was around 10 to 13 degrees, straight up to 5 is a big oof to adjust to. Anyways, after we met the cold air, it was time for us to meet Estonia's second greatest treasure, the rain. Every day, for 2 weeks straight. There's a reason Estonians are whiter than your average consumer at Starbucks. It's cause they almost never see the goddamn sun. Maybe we had a solid 5 minutes of sunshine for the entire time we were there, and that's it. So, we got to Tallinn, and we headed straight to the bus station, aka the Tallinna Bussijaam, and got our tickets to Pärnu, the city where the forest, which we would call our home for the next 2 weeks, was. We got to Pärnu, got into some strange van with a bunch of Croatians, and 20 minutes later we were in the middle of nowhere in some bumfuck Estonian forest. Now, here's the thing about Estonia. It has 1.3 million people living in it. Not in the capital, but in the entire country. When you are in the countryside of Estonia, there are almost no people for several kilometers. Just look at this. Straight up like you're in some 100th sequel of Friday the 13th. Not to mention the nature is extremely quiet. Normally when you go somewhere outdoors, you hear some birds chirping or something. Not in Estonia. Best you can get from the outside is the rain. And oh boy did we get that. We also got horses. They were pretty neat. So, by this point you might be wondering why in God's name was I in the middle of nowhere in Estonia with some Croatians? And I'll tell you why. Erasmus Plus. Erasmus Plus is a youth exchange program where the EU pays your entire trip to go somewhere and listen to some European seminar for 5 to 10 days about some European values. Shit's pretty great. You meet new friends, see new places, smoke weed with Russians in the middle of an Estonian forest. It's great. Speaking of Estonian forests, look at this. These tall ass trees untouched by man. Did you know that more than 80% of Estonia is covered by these bad boys? Yeah, me neither. And guess what? Estonia isn't only covered in trees. It also has over 1,500 lakes. Like this one. I mean, if it wasn't for the goddamn rain, Estonia would be a nature lover's paradise on earth. Hell, we even got to look at Sweden from Estonia's marshy coast. Spoiler alert, we didn't see it. We just saw the salty water, and also what communism does to a country. We even got to go to Pärnu, which was pretty alright. Reminded me of any other small European town. It had the city center with the pedestrian walk, with a bunch of shops for tourists, which surprisingly there were very few in October. I wonder why. And we also got a look at the Baltic Sea once more. Good sea to be honest, but yeah, what else? You also got a bridge where you can look at the pier and the boats. You got mud bats for some reason, which look like the town hall, and you also got the town hall, which looks like somewhere you can get a dub. Speaking of dubs, weed in Estonia is kind of legal. Anything under 0.5% in THC or some shit is legal for sale. And you even got a weed shop in Pärnu, which to be honest, if you live there and don't get to see the sun for most of the year is very necessary, let's be honest. Yeah, and also got everything else in the small town, some cute little streets and churches, schools, alcohol stores, everything. Anyways, after we finished getting baked in Pärnu, we got to go to the big boy, Tallinn.
On pesa teinud punase.
Oh man, oh boy, Tallinn. Tallinn is one of my favorite cities. Yes, the center of the city is crowded and filled with tourists, especially German tourists, for some reason, but oh man, is this place great. Tallinn has an estimated population of 430,000 people. It's roughly the size of Minneapolis. For a European comparison, Novi Sad in Serbia has roughly around 300,000 people. Now, Novi Sad looks like this, and Tallinn looks like this. Fuck me, is this the epicenter of development. Considering the city has been under communism up until the 90s, and it grew to this, in a country of barely a million, it's astounding. Tallinn is a tech startup, nest of the north. the dead video chat program used by Eastern Europeans to talk to their immigrant relatives in Germany in the early 2000s, known as Skype, originated from here. And also some useless money transfer program known as TransferWise, but who cares about that? Tallinn is living the dream. But that's not all that Tallinn has to offer. Tallinn also has one of the oldest preserved medieval city centers in the world. You get there and you are met with these big ass walls that would even leave China and Donald Trump bust out. Meanwhile, inside the walls are encaptured these colorful medieval buildings and churches. Although a lot of them are now souvenir stores and overpriced restaurants, but most European city centers are like that. Anyways, at least they didn't ruin the beauty with too much tourism like Prague. When you're walking these streets, they just make you feel like you're in the 13th century, ready to die from the plague, and it's simply great. Nevertheless, when you arrive to Tallinn, you'll probably do so via an airplane or a bus, and you will naturally want to go to the hostel you got booked in the center of the city, or in our case, in the house of one Russian/Ukrainian/Estonian dude I smoked weed with in the forest. And you might be wondering, how in God's name am I gonna get there? And the answer is by public transport. And if you've been a long time viewer of this channel, you know that I don't pay for no public transport in the EU. Fuck that 2.8 euros fee. The good people of Estonia aren't paying their taxes for nothing. The good news is that in Tallinn, if you're a resident, you get to ride the bus for free! Just like any other cheap Eastern European, I shut my mouth and pretended to be Estonian. So, you catch the bus and you get to the old town, you enjoy the tourist attractions and the beautiful architecture, and you might wonder to yourself, what am I gonna eat? Well, no worries. Estonia is one of the cheaper countries you can visit. The average Estonian earns somewhere roughly less than 1,000 euros a month. So finding some cheap food shouldn't be an issue if you leave the old town. One great place to eat is at Lido. It's like a buffet, but you pay for each article you get, and you can quite easily fill your plate for 10 euros. You can get a normal portion of food for even less, like 5, but damn, the food is good. Estonian cuisine mostly includes meat, potatoes, and fish, and for the most part, that's all we ate. I get an extra 10 kilos from just visiting, so if you're vegan or some bullshit like that, you're gonna have a bad time here. Most of the food is very meat intensive and influenced heavily by Russian cuisine. Speaking of Russians, 25% of the Estonian population is made up by Russians. Estonia is a bilingual society where the majority of people speak both Estonian and Russian. Their schools require to teach Russian or Estonian at a 60 to 40% ratio, which means that either one of the languages will be taught in 60% of the classes and then the other language in the other 40%. And that has led to churches like this one, the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, one of the most beautiful cathedrals I've seen in my life. It's not as massive as, say, St. Vitus Cathedral, but it definitely rivals it to an extent. The patterns and colors are just astounding and really is breathtaking. It's a damn shame it's underrated when it comes to the world famous churches. Okay, so what else is there? Yes, the Independence Square. A place where teenagers try to be the next Tony Hawk and where the glorious independence of Estonia is commemorated. Where in 1918, Estonia declared its independence from Russia. Where then the USSR came and tried to take him back over the next 2 years, which, through some goddamn miracle, Estonia survived and kept its independence, only to be run over 20 years later by German tanks and then occupied by the USSR until the early 90s. Some wild shit, I tell you. Today's Estonian independence was gained in the 90s when the Baltic states, these three, formed a human chain across the region and sang national folk songs until Russia finally let loose. It's like Gandhi's food strike against the British, except they sang. What's even more ridiculous than gaining your independence by singing is that it actually worked. And thus we have this beautiful square. There's also this cool passage street that has blocks which tell the history of Estonia, and it gives you a future prediction such as this, which, if history has taught us anything, Russia is heavily disputing. Tallinn also has a bunch of parks with statues, but if you've seen one park in your life, you've seen any other. You also have a bunch of museums and galleries, which no one really cares about. But there is the KGB Prison Museum, which isn't really a museum, rather a building where you can see where the KGB incarcerated and interrogated citizens that didn't adhere to the American art student's favorite book about politics, which to my surprise was way more comfy than I expected. Compared to what we have in the Balkans, this shit was luxurious as fuck. And yeah, that's pretty much Estonia. There's also a student town, Tartu, which we didn't get a chance to visit, which is either a blessing or a curse, you decide. But yeah, Estonia, a country covered in forests and lakes, sparsely populated and located right at Russia's doorstep. And in all honesty, one of my favorite countries. Anyways, let me know what you think of Estonia. Have you been there? Would you like to visit? Let me know in the comments. My name is Nick, and you've watched Living Ironically in Europe.